What is up, you guys? Marty McFly coming at you, bringing you guys the merch. Today, I wanted to talk about what I would think should belong in any essential Halloween reading list. This is just from what I have from my own personal collection, but things that I thought about around the spooky season, Halloween. The leaves are changing. We're starting to finally get a little bit of cooler air, shorter days, longer nights. We're starting to think about the dark, the ethereal, our feelings, and especially watching horror movies, eating candy and eating chocolate chip cookies and hot chocolate, going on hay rides, pumpkin patches. It's what I feel like is the best time of the year. Football's on TV, we have baseball, we have hockey, everything coming together, and I think it's just a wonderful time to be alive. So these are things that I thought about as far as a reading list. What do we read around this time of year? Things that make us happy, things that help us further go into our feelings of Halloween and autumn and what are we looking for? What are we reading these days? There's millions of horror movies out there, and the list could go on forever. The music list has to be good. There are so many things we can look forward to. So I figured I would start with some of the ones off of my reading list, things that I thought about personally. And I figured the best place to start is Trick or Treat by Lisa Morton. This is a history of Halloween. If there's one book I could recommend enough to at least go into the history, as far back as we can go, what do we know about Halloween? What do we know about the festival? What do we know about trick or treating and our capitalistic ways and things that just make us enjoy it so much? Now, the book, pretty short. You can get through it really quickly. It's only 250 pages. It's a beautiful book, though, well written, going as far back as we can go to the Festival of Samhain, spelled Samhain. Predating Christianity and their influence, predating as far back as we can go into the Celtic, and even before that. If you've seen Halloween, the Thorn trilogy, 4, 5, and 6, talking about the Celts and the Thorn and runes, and just as far back as we think we can go. She does a beautiful job of explaining that and really helping it dumb down it for the rest of us personally. There's a couple of errors in there, not too many, very few that I saw, but occasionally the dates will be wrong. For instance, John Carpenter's Halloween came out in 1978. I think she continually says that it comes out in the wrong year. But if you've seen the 2018 version of the 2018 version of Halloween, also including John Carpenter to assist with that movie, that was supposed to be the 40th anniversary of Michael Myers, essentially, back in 1978. So, there's a couple errors, but not really too many. I think it's a great text to read around Halloween. Why do we celebrate? Why do we have the feelings that we have? What are the old traditions that people used to enjoy? There's countries and there's cities that have banned Halloween. Yes, it's a real thing. There is a town that is Halloween all year long. That's in Minnesota. I would love to go one day. It goes into pop culture, it goes into music, it goes into Dia de los Muertos, it goes into a bunch of things. So I think overall it's a great book, especially to read around this time of year. It's quick, you can get through it pretty quickly. Fantastic book. So this doesn't really touch on Halloween too much, but it's kind of horror-ish, and it's got a lot of mystery and suspense to it. That is another other than Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Hound of the Baskervilles, starring our friend Sherlock Holmes. If you've seen the BBC's rendition of Sherlock Holmes, the newest one that came out, they actually did a fantastic modern approach to it. It's a long episode, but you get so much of it. It's very satisfying, the mystery and the ending. They still keep the beast, the hound, as you want to call it, into the story. But I think the OG book, the classic, I picked this up in a bookstore in Melbourne, Florida called New to You Books. Thank you guys. This was super cheap and a great read. You can get through this one pretty quickly around this time of year and still gives you those same feelings of Halloween and autumn and fall and the cold air. So where do we go from here? There's so many different approaches to this, especially for around this time of year. Another good one, I'm sure you've seen the movie, but before the movie, we had the book. This is William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist. And I actually picked this up in a bookstore at the top of Alki Island, West Seattle, not too far from Easy Street Records in Seattle, Washington. But it's a great read. You can actually get through this pretty quickly. The wording in this one's actually pretty big, but the book is so beautifully written and very eloquently written. It has great detail of everything that's going on. Before we had the movie, of course, we had the book. If you're still interested, the movie was so tightly bound to the book, you can really feel it when you watch this. You can almost see the movie in your head. I think William Peter Blatty's rendition of this, there's a lot of talk about Christianity and medicine. It really gives you a visceral approach to the story, and I think that's why I enjoyed reading it so much. So Of course, now that you go read it, you got to go see the movie again. I just rewatched the movie again the other day. It's the best. It's one easily top three horror movies of all time, in my own personal opinion. I'm sure a lot of people felt the same way when that came out. The thing that really shocked me is when I had already seen this and read the book, you read about what the impact of what this book did and the movie that it did when it came out. People were going back to church in droves because they were afraid that they or their family member would become possessed, and they were just going back to mass in droves. And I think that's awesome. I mean, I'm a devout Catholic myself, and I still enjoy reading the heck out of this book. Still have to go to mass on Sundays, especially after reading this. So, while I'm on that note, we have the sequel. This is William Peter Blatty's Legion. This, if you've seen the movie, this is actually part 3 in the series. It's called Exorcist Part 3, Legion. This is a continuation of essentially the original story. I don't want to spoil anything because the more I talk about it, the more I spoil this. It's the similar feeling, visceral detail, talking a lot about Christianity, Catholicism, medicine, especially at that point in time, what patients had to go through. And I think it's a great continuation of where the story left off. Just as creepy, just as scary, great for Halloween. Now, Stephen King's work is pretty tough. It's such a long, it's such a long list of works, and I don't really know what goes great with Halloween for him. I could think of 2. And the 2, most notably, one of them was based, you have the movie Silver Bullet, which was based off of his graphic novel work Cycle of the Werewolf. And in the movie, they briefly discuss Halloween because of the werewolf attacks on Halloween. And I like the way they do it. And of course, the guy's name is Marty in the story, which is awesome. Now, in the book, they don't really go into that kind of Halloween detail as much, but the production team decided to give it more flair. If they did it on Halloween, it would bring more production to the movie. And so I do not have a hard copy of that, but I think it's a great tale, especially with the pictures and everything. And it's werewolves, Halloween, werewolves. Couldn't agree more. Now, that's a shorter read for the long term, and I think you can get away with that around Halloween. The rest of his books, I wouldn't recommend it around Halloween. It's like 1,200 pages. I think I actually have a first press, but it's in terrible condition. And I think if you read the hardback now, the one that's big over at Barnes & Noble and Target, it's like 1,200 pages. It's got all the extra pages. I'm not going to recommend that to someone for Halloween because you just don't have time. I don't have time. I read it once, and I'm never going to read it ever again. It was a great book. Don't get me wrong. It's a fantastic book, but I don't ever want to read that ever again. I'd rather just watch the movie. Also, what's your opinion? OG It or the new one, parts 1 and 2? Where are you guys feeling? I mean, it's Tim Curry. Like, to me, it's like it's Tim Curry. Like, I think that clown is still spooky, creepy, and funny, and I think the feelings it invokes, because he's still funny. You almost like him for like 2 seconds, and then you realize he's evil and he's going to go eat all your children. Now, the new one, I thought part 1 was fantastic. Part 2, long. Definitely still spooky, definitely still dreadful and scary, and had some good evoking emotions. But I think I liked part 1 better than part 2. Now, the new thing now is apparently they're going to take part 1 and part 2 of the newest series with all these bonus scenes and extras, and it's going to be in this super movie of it, and it's going to be like forever long, but it's going to have everything in it. And I think I would like to see the way that goes. Especially there's one scene in it, and I wish they would bring it back, and they sort of hinted on it, and I think it was just like, I wanted them to bring in the scene in because of how much dread the scene gave me in the book, and it's the icebox scene. They kind of hinted on it in the movie, they kind of like flared it, but not really. The other one is the werewolf scene. I think the werewolf scene, and I think the icebox scene in the book, I wish they had just kept and brought it in and just did something with it, and they kind of hinted on it, but not much. Enough talking from me. The next, I would say, from Stephen King, and it's just quick enough to read it. It comes in it's a little over 600 pages, but Salem's Lot, it's short for Jerusalem's Lot, basically. Stephen King and vampires, he does a fantastic job of it. This was the first Stephen King book I ever read. Still my favorite next to Dreamcatcher up to this day. Go read it. It doesn't really mention Halloween, but it's New England, it's spooky, it's cold, it's scary, it's vampires. In the original 1970s classic movie, I think did a better job for Barlow than anyone ever did. The TV series that came out in the 2000s, it was okay, it wasn't bad, but Barlow wasn't scary. Barlow in the 70s, when they took Nosferatu and brought him back into life, terrifying. Now, I think this is probably the shorter end and one of the better things you could do for Halloween. There's also like there's his short stories, which I think I have some of them here. You have Nightmares and Dreamscapes. I think you can probably get away with that for Halloween as well. Your possibilities are endless. This is just my own personal things. Everything's Eventual. You could probably get away with Halloween, maybe even The Secret Window. I think that's short enough. So these are just some things I was thinking of perusing. Now, I don't deal into RLstein too much because of Goosebumps. Goosebumps goes on forever. Maybe The Werewolf of Fever Swamp, I think, would be a good rendition for Halloween because I think it even goes into Halloween, if I'm not mistaken. This is just something that I read when I was a little bit younger. Big, bold font, but it goes into a bunch of different stories. That's R.L. Stein's Nightmare Hour. I think this is the perfect R.L. Stein Halloween compendium. The very first story, very Children of the Corn meets Pumpkinhead meets Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. It's called, it's called the Pumpkin Patch, I think. So I think a great place to start would be R.L. Stein's Nightmare Hour. There's several different stories in there. They're all plenty spooky and scary. I think this is a great place to start as far as that goes. And I feel like you can read this and you don't feel like you're, a 11-year-old prepubescent trying to read a story. I think this is actually still gives you just enough dread where you want to keep watching it. Now, I don't deal into the graphic novels too much, but there are a couple I could probably recommend around reading this time of year. And this one is Something is Killing the Children. This is one of the newer stories from Boom Comics. Recently, I think it was just purchased by Netflix. So the prices of the original copy #1 of this story is skyrocketing. It's beyond $100 now. I mean, just for the first press. If you find a copy of the first press of the first comic, get your hands on it. It's going to be worth a lot more, even more as soon as the TV show comes out. But this is, I don't know how to explain this to you without giving it away, but literally Something is Killing the Children. It's violent, it's gory, they cuss a lot. You have Erica Slaughter, who is our heroine, taking on her young lad to basically go hunting some monsters. This is gory, and something's definitely killing the children and basically biting them in half. I don't give away too much because the story really went and took a left turn from where I was not expecting. But overall, they did a great job with it. The artwork is great. The story so far has been fantastic. They spare no bars. This is like an R-rated graphic novel, to be honest with you. And so far, this is the trade paperback. Got on Amazon for like $15. If you want somewhere to start, and I'm still new in the comic thing. I'm not super involved, but I think this is a great place to start, at least for the Halloween season. Now, I can't talk graphic novels without talking about these three, and I think comic books, if there were the big three, I think for Halloween, this is probably where I would go, and that is none other than Batman: The Long Halloween with Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. I think it's literally called The Long Halloween. The first story deals the most with Halloween, and as our killer holiday starts murdering more people, we start going through the different holidays, and then our finale, of course, in book 13, our pumpkin is pretty decrepit at this point and rotted. This is Halloween, though. I mean, I think this is a great story to read around the Halloween time. You can get through this pretty quickly. The artwork is incredible. The drawings of the pumpkins and the ghosts and the ghoulies and the decorations, everything just brings around that feeling of autumn and Halloween. And I think this is a great place to start for anyone. These are first presses of these, by the way. Did not realize that with the new Batman how much these would go for, but the prices of these have skyrocketed since I first bought them, and I'm so glad I have them now, because now they're getting harder and harder to get, unless if you're paying an arm and a leg for them. Now, the other two titles I could think of as far as comic book goes and Halloween, there are so many more. Plenty of people better than me have made longer videos about their quintessential Halloween comic reading list, but these are just two, and they both happen to be in this compendium. This is The Tomb of Dracula. This is a trade paperback, black and white, covering many of the stories of Tomb of Dracula in the comic form. It also goes as far to include Howard the Duck, and of course the other one, which would be Werewolf by Night. I think if there's any other stories that would have to be included, it would be Werewolf by Night, Tomb of Dracula, and then I think Howard the Duck belongs in there too, to be honest with you. These were a great read though. This was a lot of fun, especially for taking the Dracula story and taking it somewhere else. It's still spooky. I would say this is more Hammer horror Dracula than it is Bram Stoker's Dracula, if that makes any sense. Pardon me. Now, there is one book Yep, and that's exactly as heavy as it seems. There's one book that was mentioned over and over again for the essential Halloween reading list, and I'll have some notable mentions at the very end. But I think I totally agree with this sentiment that this belongs on any Halloween reading list. 600 pages, we have October Dreams, a celebration of Halloween by Richard Chasmore and Robert Moorish, editors. There are so many different authors that going into the compendium of Halloween. We have Ray Bradbury, Dean Koontz, Peter Straub. I mean, the artist list goes on. We have so many different generations of Halloween writing that goes into this book that it really takes you on a time machine in the past of past writings as far as Halloween goes. I mean, the authors just goes on forever. Michael Marshall Smith, Caitlin Kiernan, I mean, Tim Levin. We just go on forever as far as Halloween writing goes. Each story is spooky, gritty, ghoulish, murderous, and suspenseful. And this book I paid about $50 for, but it's totally worth it, the amount of stories you get. I think this is an excellent text to read around this time of the year. Each story won't take you that long. You can get through a couple if you just want to read a couple before Halloween and get in the spooky spirit. But about $600 worth, totally worth it at the end of the day. Looks like these are going up for a lot of money as well. I hate stirring the pot, but if you wanted a first press or you wanted the newer editions, they're a little bit cheaper. You know, I think you can get the second, third, etc. for a little bit of a cheaper money. And I think this original picture, which we have the boy holding our jack-o'-lantern underneath the big mighty oak, I think this copy is going for a lot more. But overall, I'm excited to have that in my collection. If you read Trick or Treat, my apologies. If you read Trick or Treat and A History of Halloween, it even mentions if there's any definitive text you should read for Halloween, October Dreams is definitely it, and I couldn't agree more. And that was kind of like my main list. Now, my apologies, there are several that I can't find, and I don't know where they're at. They're probably in one of my Bigfoot lockers, the book somewhere. And I think there's 4 books that we should talk about that should be on the reading list, and I just can't find the hard copies. But that was my list for right now. And I did forget one more, but this is kind of in between. This is kind of like a misnomer. We read it at Halloween, but do we discuss Halloween? He only discusses Halloween for like 2 seconds. So I would include this in the list as well, but this is The Raven and Other Poems by Edgar Allan Poe. We always talk about his poetry, the love, the death, the darkness, the murder, the suspense. And we always bring him up around Halloween, but he only mentions Hallow's Eve, Hallowed Eve, or some variant of that only once. And any of the poems that I've read, he only talks about the idea of Halloween maybe once in his stories. But, Murders in the Rue Morgue, The Telltale Heart, probably my favorite Telltale Heart. If we're going to read around Halloween, something that's spooky and dreadful and scary. Murders in the Rue Morgue, The Raven, Telltale Heart, Pit and the Pendulum. The stories go on forever, but his poetry is so perfect around this time of year for spoiling our dear old blackened hearts. And I would have to say that still belongs on the reading list. Now, the honorable mentions I could think of, yeah, they belong on the list. So I'm going to not make this video go on forever, but here's the 4 that I was thinking of. One of my favorite books to read around this time of year is Scary Scary Halloween by E. Bunting. I've read this so many times. I read it every year growing up with my parents. And we bought this book in Daytona Beach, Florida at this random bookstore we found. It was a first press that we were lucky enough to get. And to this day, the paper still smells like dried leaves. I can't explain it. I don't know why. But every year when we take it out of the cellophane, the covering, because we take good care of it, it still smells like dried, crispy leaves. And I can't explain why the paper smells that way. It's the best smelling book I probably have in my collection at this point. I can't find it. I think it's currently in the glass case or something like that, hiding from me. The next one, so Scary Scary Halloween by E. Bunting. If you haven't read it, go read it. It's a delightful book, beautiful artwork, a beautiful story, and it just takes you away, and you literally melt into the book as you read it. Can't recommend it enough. There's also Rattlebone Rock, which I enjoyed a lot growing up. Any of the Scooby-Doos I think are great for Halloween, but Rattlebone Rock is just fun. It kind of gets you in a rhythm. There's a beat, and then there's an iambic pentameter as you continue to read it. That also goes down as well. Now, people are going to get mad because I didn't mention them. I'm sorry, I can't find my hard copies. But yes, there are 2 others I was thinking of. One of them being Charlie Brown's It's a Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. I have the movie. I have it right over there. It's one of my favorite things to watch every year. Can't find the book anywhere. But if you want the companion to the movie, I think the book does a wonderful job. I love the artwork. I love the story. I love just going away someplace and just reading it. And I think it's on any must-read Halloween list. And last but not least, I'm sure people have been like, but Marty, why didn't you talk about this earlier? I know, I can't find the hard copy. My apologies. I would say the other one, and I'm sure you've been thinking about this whole time, what book would go great with Halloween? And that is, of course, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. I didn't mention this earlier because I can't find my hard copy. I'm sure I will find it soon enough. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, if you know, you know. Chances are you've read it. Chances are you've heard about it. Chances are you've also seen the movie that came out, back in the early 2000s with Christina Ricci, which I think was actually a great movie, a great way to take, a great place to take the movie. I think as far as that direction, Tim Burton's direction, as far as that movie goes, it's graphic, it's gory, and I thought it was a lot of fun. Definitely a great movie to watch. Lots of heads rolling, and I think the cast did a fantastic job with it. There's a lot of OG casting in that movie that you've seen in other Tim Burton films, as well as seeing in some of the other British films. I mean, I think some of them were actually in The Patriot as well. But of course, that is that movie. And then, of course, the book itself, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. It is what it is. It's one of the greatest books to read around Halloween, even though they don't really touch on Halloween. But with the festivities you read about when they're in the book and they're having the little parties and everything, it kind of brings you that sensation of Halloween with the weather changing and everything. And the story itself is just a nice story. It's a short read. You can get through it every Halloween pretty quickly, and I think it's just a great place to go, especially around for that time of year. So those are some of mine. I'm sure the stories and the number of books goes on forever. You could probably read The Walking Dead and call it, Halloween-ish. But I think there's so many different options out there. I'm curious, what do you guys like to read around this time of year? What makes you excited? Are you guys ready for Halloween? I know with COVID, it kind of changed everything for a lot of us, but I'm still excited for Halloween, hoping to still get dressed up and go somewhere this year. And I'm still excited to watch more horror movies and listen to more music. What are you guys listening to? What are you guys reading? Did you guys like the list? Did you hate the list? Do you want to talk about it? And I hope to hear from you guys soon. Happy Halloween.